Good day and welcome to the presentation for Reading Support and Literature, Year 4, Semester 2. This presentation will help you to prepare for your assignments and also for the examinations of Year 2022. My name is Melinda Coffey and I am the tutor for this subject. As you will see on your presentation, my telephone number is there as well as my email address, and also the hours during which you are free to contact me. I would just like to ask that you stick to these hours. You are welcome to send me an email or a WhatsApp message or a normal message during the day, but please just note that I will only be able to respond to you during the hours as they are listed here. In order for you to prepare, I just have a few general notes that I would like to share with you. It is very important for you to study all of the study units that is in your study guide, as well as to look at the specific learning outcomes and also the learning activities as they are in your study guide. If you work through those, you will have a nice clear scope of exactly what is expected of you. The presentation, as it is in these slides, is useful and it will help you to prepare for the assignment and examinations. However, it cannot be your only form of information. You will have to check throughout your entire study guide, looking specifically at the learning outcomes and learning activities to know what is required of you. So when doing your presentation, when doing your assignment and your examinations, it's important to try to answer all the questions that is given to you. The reason for this being that even if you do not know an answer 100%, as long as you write something, there's the opportunity for you to receive a mark. And try as far as possible to not just read or remember every single word as it stands in the study guide. Put the information for yourself in your own words so that it is easier to remember. Each of us, we have a different way of learning, and you need to use the way that specifically helps you the best. So putting the information in your own words might be easier to remember as just trying to remember every word as it stands in the study guide. Plus, it also shows that you actually understand the work instead of the fact that you're just copying from the study guide. As many of the assignments and examinations are online, the information is already neat and legible, but if it happens so that you are writing it per hand, please remember to write neatly and legibly so that we can actually understand what is written there. You will see that during assignments and examinations, the marks given is a very clear indication of the information required from you, how much to write. So if a question says, for instance, list 4 items, then even if there is 6 in the study guide, do not list 6 items. You cannot get 6 marks out of 4. You will only get marks for the first 4. So it means that even if your first 4 are wrong and the last 2 are correct, you still won't receive those marks because we mark the first information that you write down. So the first 4 points that you write down will be marked, and that's where it will end there. Then it's important to read through the questions that's given to you, to look specifically for the verb in each question. So in the front of your study guide, there's a whole list of verbs given and an explanation as what is actually required of you. So in questions where you get verbs such as explain, describe, discuss especially, please write full sentences and full paragraphs. So even in the presentation where you see that some of the things I've put in bullet point, the presentation is just a summary. So some of the information will be in bullet point format, but when you write it, you need to elaborate. So you need to put it in a full sentence. You cannot just write down the points as they are given here in this presentation. Okay, so if we move on to the first slide, this is all of the information will follow from study unit 1 until the slide that specifically says study unit 2 and then 3 and 4. So in study unit 1, what we look at is first and foremost, what is reading? Because your subject is reading and literature support. So it's all about the whole process of how a child learns how to read, things that can go wrong, problem areas, and then the literature support, what sources can be used, how do we look at those sources, how can we as teachers assist children to be better readers. So what's important here is plain and simple the definition of what is reading. It's important that you understand the concept of reading and that you are able to explain to someone else what is reading. And then of course there are also benefits of reading, which is that it increases vocabulary, it improves writing skills, and it also boosts the memory. So a child will easier remember things, random facts for instance, even if they are avid readers and if they are fluent readers, it's easier to remember information. That's why it's so important that we take learners through the process of becoming fluent readers at the end of the day. Then when we look at reading in its fullest sense, it involves three main concepts. The first being word recognition, so being able to recognize specific words and what they mean. Then secondly, we have comprehension, so not just recognizing what you are reading, but understanding what you are reading. And thirdly, in a fluent manner, so being able to know what you are reading, so you have that familiarity with the word, you understand what the word means, and if you have those two, it's easy to fluently read a sentence or a paragraph, a piece of information, because you already have an understanding. Then a child will not stop after every word because they are not familiar with it. So in each of these, you will see that this slide is about word recognition, the next one comprehension, and the one after that fluency. So if we can just go back, these three slides explain what a child needs or a learner needs in order for them to be able to get this specific skill, so that they have the process of reading under the belt. So with word recognition, you will see there's words in bold. Those are the main ideas or the main skills that they need to learn. But remember, if a question asks you to explain or describe, you need to indicate the whole sentence. You cannot just list them as phonemic awareness or alphabetic principle. You have to use a full sentence. So in this slide, we have what they need to develop their word recognition. Then you also need to know what they need to develop comprehension, so an understanding of specific words. And then also what they need to develop their fluency, so to be able to nicely read a full paragraph and understand everything that they read. Then in the next slide you will see that, just so that you are aware, in the past there's been a bit of a confusion between these two concepts. We have first stages of reading, which is simply the different stages that a child goes through when learning to read. But then there's 5 developmental stages of learning to read. So a child goes through 5 developmental stages. So developmental meaning that as they grow, so their skill of reading grows as well. So it's a process through which they go. So for instance, in your awareness and exploration of reading stage, a child can go through stages of reading. So your stages of reading and developmental stages are 2 different concepts. And it's important that you are not only able to list these stages, whichever one is asked, you should also be able to describe the specific stage. So you will have to describe in the stage of awareness and exploration, what does a child go through? What development in reading takes place there? Emergent stage of reading, what development takes place there? What new skills do they learn in addition to their previous stage where they become aware of and explore reading? Then, so the first concept that is described is just the basic 5 stages of reading, where you have your word attack skills, comprehension, evaluation, application and retention, and ending in fluency. So whenever a child goes through a new stage of learning, the learning process of reading, they go through these stages. They learn the word attack skill, so seeing the specific words, and then they go through comprehension, so understanding the word. Then evaluation takes place where they are able to evaluate different meanings of a specific word. Then they move into the application and retention, meaning they are now able to use a specific word within a sentence. They can apply it to a specific sentence construction or to everyday life. And in that way they can also retain it, so they keep that word. It's a new word that they now know. And then ultimately you have your fluency. So when they move over to the next stage, the next developmental stage, they will probably once again go through these, because now it's more difficult words. So that's then why we have these two different areas. You have just normal stages and developmental stages. Then we have motivation. What is essential here to know is that motivation is needed for a child during the reading process. Children who are not motivated to read struggle to move through the different stages. They get bored, they do not see the need for specific things, so they just aren't motivated to stick to the process. And then there's some ideas that teachers can use, such as explanation reading time, sharing, reading to your learners, trying different genres like poetry. So these are just some ideas of how to motivate your learners to read. Then a very important concept that stretches throughout both this slide and, as you will see, this next slide, is the concept that the reading process is a complex developmental process. So what's important to note in this statement is that it is a developmental process, meaning that there are different stages that a child goes through. Just the same way as a child learns to walk and a child learns to talk, a child will learn how to read. So it is important to describe this statement that's made here, that it is a complex developmental process. You also have then your stages of the developmental process that's also listed here that can be included. So when this is the type of question that will most likely be asked in questions such as discuss or describe the process. So once again, no, not bullet points, but nice full sentences where you give through the concept that it is something that a child grows through. It's a process. It's something that happens as a child gets older. Every time they learn new words, they learn to do more, they learn to put more complex sentences together. Then there are a few different theories. There are 4. So in the next 4 slides, we look at traditional theory of reading, cognitive theory of reading, hybrid theory of reading, and then lastly your metacognitive theory of reading. So what's important to take note during these 4 different theories of reading, starting with traditional, is you need to be able to describe each of the theories. So you will either be asked to just discuss, for instance, the traditional theory, which is this one. You will be asked to describe the cognitive theory on its own. You will also be asked to describe, for instance, hybrid theory, or you could be asked to describe your metacognitive theory. But it's important to note that you might also be asked to compare two of the theories to each other. For instance, compare, let's say, traditional theory to cognitive theory. What is important there is your verb. It asks you to compare. So if you say the traditional theory, let's just go back to that one. The traditional theory is a process by which the learner then learns small discrete parts of a word. You have to say, so compared to now the cognitive theory, how is it different? So if we make the statement about the traditional theory, we have to in the same way say that in the cognitive theory, a child will be asked to learn the process of reading before they don't break it up into as small parts, for instance. So that is what compare means. You have to give facts of the one, but also facts of the other. So do not just give the facts then of one of the two theories, but compare them with each other. Or if you are asked to state how is one theory different from another, it also means please give the details of both these theories, not just one of the theories. Then there are some skills that a child learns that influences the learning to read process. So these are the 5 R's: phonemic awareness, alphabetic principle, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. So these are the 5 skills that a child learns in order to make the reading process take place. Then we have a few reading problems that children experience, and it's not just common to certain parts of the world, but actually found all over the world. So there are many children that go through these 4 specific causes of the learning difficulties or reading difficulties. So the causes of reading difficulties is dyslexia, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, auditory processing disorder, and your visual processing issues. So you should be able to list these 4 different causes, but also to describe them. So it's not necessary to go onto the internet and get very broad, difficult descriptions. Your study guide gives a nice brief description of what each of these causes are, and it's more than sufficient for your assignment as well as the examination. What is important though is please learn the correct spelling of these words. It's not very difficult words or a lot of information, so it's important that you write them correctly and get to know the correct name of the disorder, otherwise it changes the meaning behind it. Then it is important that a teacher creates a reading culture in schools. There are many different ways, and different areas that can be used in a school. For instance, you will see here, you can use the school entrance foyer, you can use corridors, so the hallways, notice boards, you can use the principal's office, staff room, classrooms, library. All of these areas can be used to create a reading culture. So please read up in your study guide about the different ways in which these areas can be used. So for instance, in your library, you would put up posters, you would invite people to have talks, you would tell children about the latest books, so you would display them on shelves so that children can easily see what's new in our library. So each of these areas can be used to get children to want to read at the end of the day. Then there are, as we said in the beginning with the slide where we had the table that said there's the stages of reading and the developmental stages. Here we now look at the developmental stages. So the one that you will notice is not added here is the awareness and exploration stage. This one starts from emergent readers, because awareness and exploration doesn't have very many characteristics, as that's the stage where you really have your very, very young children that basically are just getting to know what is a book. So there's not really much reading taking place yet. But you need to be able to know the characteristics of each of these stages of emergent readers, followed by your early readers, then they move to transitional readers and end up being fluent readers at the end of the day. So those are the developmental stages that children go through. And then each of these stages then also they have their characteristics, but they also have ways in which a teacher can support children through each of these stages. So, for instance, with emergent readers, the teacher will use two specific activities. The first being taking learners on a book walk, and the second being making connection to familiar words. So you need to be able to say not just the characteristics of the stage, but also how will a teacher support a learner during that specific stage, meaning what activities will they do in a classroom so that children can get through the stage. So now we move on to study Unit 2, which starts with the fact that literature satisfies specific aims and psychological needs. What are these aims and psychological needs? It's cultural value, expanding horizons, building vocabulary, improving writing skills, and also teaching critical thinking. So these are the aims or the psychological needs that needs to be satisfied by literature in a school setting. So you need to be able to discuss each of these 5 different areas. Then we have our 4 different types of reading. So when children are in the reading process, they can apply different types of reading. It's either skimming or scanning, which are both relatively quick ways of looking over information, but you also have intensive and extensive reading. So intensive is where you are learning basically information. So it's important to focus on what you're doing, whereas extensive reading is a lot about reading for pleasure. So it's storybook reading. There's not as much focus involved as intensive reading. So it's important that you need to be able to explain the different types of reading, but once again also be able to compare different types of reading to each other. For instance, how is skimming and scanning either similar to each other, and how are they also different? So when we speak about a verb like compare, it doesn't just mean that we want differences between two things. It also means that we would like to see how are they similar to each other. Then we move on to the fact that in a classroom we have silent reading and loud reading. So the next couple of slides look at the first one, how is silent and loud reading different from each other, similar to each other. We move on to what is the purposes of your sustained silent reading. So why would we practice sustained silent reading in a classroom? And then we end off with the advantages of loud reading. So why would we practice loud reading in a classroom and not just silent reading in a classroom? Then we have a few different genres of children's literature. So as you will see, there's quite a couple listed here on this slide, but in your study guide, there's a description for each of these. So you need to be able to know both the genre's name, for instance, a picture book or a fable or a biography, but then you also need to be able to say, what is it? So what is a picture book? What is a biography book about? Then literature plays a role in developing learners' moral values, but also developing learners' gender roles and sexual identity. You'll see later on, a third one comes in, which says that literature also plays a role in developing their self-concept and their empathy towards others. So these are the 3 areas of where literature plays a role in developing something for learners. So if we look at moral values, literature has an impact on the moral values that children have. So you need to be able to describe, if a child reads a book, what does that mean for their moral development? Do they learn something, for instance? Do they learn about moral values? Do they see how the characters portray certain moral values, how they deal with problems, and then that enables them to deal with the same problems in their own lives, for instance? How does literature impact their concept of gender? How does it impact their concept of their sexual identity? So it's for you to read through all of this information in your study guide, and then please make a summary where you take out the main points, so that if asked the question, for instance, do you agree with the fact that literature plays a role in the development of a child's moral values, then you need to be able to bring forth the most important facts in the study guide that either supports this statement or that says no, but the statement is not true. So there's on the slide very little information. This is not sufficient for, say, a 10-mark question. You need to go to your study guide and get more information. This is a very, very brief summary given here of these two different developmental areas. There's much more in your study guide. So there's also how teachers can use children's literature to promote gender equity. So that falls under the section of how the impact it has on their gender roles and sexual identity. In that area, it also says, how can children's literature be used to promote gender equity? So having children understand that there's equality between the two genders. So here is the section then of how children's literature impacts their understanding of themselves and also the world around them. So how do they have empathy with people around them? How do they understand themselves? What does literature teach them about understanding themselves? It teaches them, for instance, a positive sense of self, the ability to practice self-control. So once again, in your study guide, there's much more information. This is a very brief summary of what is in there, as well as the section about empathy, how empathy is developed. You can then also go into that. Then there are certain criteria to keep in mind when selecting suitable books for your learners. This is, you have books in general. So if we say books in general, it's these 4 points, that it has to have compelling content, it has to have realistic characters, it needs to be picture books with strong, colorful illustrations. So your pictures have to match the story. And then also the importance of finding the correct books. So these 4 points is how, what to look for when selecting books in general. But then there's also the section that looks specifically at what to consider when you are looking for storybooks, information books, and illustrations or designs. So please also take a look in your study guide at what specifically teachers need to look at when they select those 3 specific kinds of books. So not just books in general, but those specific kinds of books. Then the chapter or the study unit ends off by looking at a concept of striking a balance between sport, watching television, or leisure activities in general, and reading. These are the 3 main areas of a child's life, you can basically say. They are either taking part in sports activities, they need to make time for their leisure activities, such as watching television, but they also have to make time for reading. So if you read through this section in your study guide, once again, this is a very brief summary. Please look at what it says in the study guide and summarize some main points for yourself, so that you are able to say, yes, I do see that there's a need for teachers to assist a child in striking this balance, Or no, I really can't see how teachers fit into helping children to create a balance. So you need to be able to either discuss this statement or be able to argue the facts. And when you are asked to critically discuss or argue something, it means that you have to give your own point of view. So not just what the study guide says, but your own point of view as well. So in other words, do you agree or do you disagree? Then study unit 3 starts off with reading readiness activities. You will see on this slide there's 3, followed by another 4 on the next slide. So all in all, there's 7 reading readiness activities. It's important that you are able to name the activity, describe it, so explain what are visual perception activities, for instance. What is form constancy? What is figure ground? But then it's also important that in your study guide it says specific activities that, first of all, how do you know that these specific skills are underdeveloped, and what activities can be done in class so that these are strengthened. So for instance, when we speak about the last one, figure ground, what does a child do that you can see this specific reading readiness activity is underdeveloped? And also then, as a teacher, what activities do you do with the children so that this is strengthened, so that they can have the concept of figure ground? Then we move on to multimodal text. What's important here is a clear definition of what is multimodal text. So if we look at this, it's the concept of multimodal. So it in itself says more than one mode. Multi means more than one, modal, more than one mode. So basically multimodal means that you are teaching something, so you have text, information, but in different ways. So it's a combination of different ways. So for instance, you have written text, but also verbal text. So not just are you reading a piece or showing a piece of information to children, you are also talking about that piece. So 2 different modes. And also in the same way, you might have written text with pictures included. So once again, 2 modes, written, pictures. So a child is able to put these 2 together. Why would you use that in a classroom? For the simple fact that that is how the world is developing. Children have different learning methods. They are being shown or more than one thing. So they have the internet. They have YouTube videos. They have watching information on the television. They have textbooks. They have podcasts that they might listen to. They have the teacher talking in the class. So there's very many different forms, and it's the way that the world is developing. A teacher also needs to bring in these different ways so that children's learning methods can also be respected and they can learn in different ways. Then there are different reading skills to be applied when reading to your senior primary learners. You need to be able to, for instance, plan enough time. You need to be able to choose stories and texts that respond to a learner's specific interest. You can preview the book yourself. So you just need to be able to know what specific skills would be applied by a teacher in a classroom when reading to their learners. So you should not be able to just list them as they are here in bullet points. So you need to be able to give an explanation. When we say plan enough time, what do we mean by that? When we say preview the book, what do we mean by that? So you need to be able to elaborate a bit more. Then it's important that you understand that a teacher does not just go into a classroom and read from a book. Don't just grab a book from the shelf and say, today we're reading this specific book, but that a reading lesson plan be created. Then we have reading comprehension. So you need to be able to describe what is reading comprehension, but you also need to say should learners do to improve their reading comprehension. So as you'll see, there's a few different activities that they can do to basically then improve these the reading comprehension skill. You also have your reading comprehension, but then after that, if you understand what you are reading, you need to retain what you are reading. So how can that be developed? There are a few different ways. You need to be able, once again, to describe these. So don't just follow the slide by listing them, but also read up about the description for each. And then we also look at a reading corner. So the concept of having a specific area in the classroom where children can be exposed to this wonderful concept of reading. So here what is important is you need to be able to describe what will you find in a reading corner, or how will you as a teacher set up a reading corner. So please, when you are asked to explain, describe, discuss, do not just list the items as they are listed here, but put it into a sentence. For instance, so that we can understand why would you put something there. If you say there needs to be carpet, or there needs to be an area rug, then say, why would you say that? So I would put in an area rug so that the children can lay down and read, so that the children are comfortable. So a nice full sentence, not just bullet point if asked to explain or to discuss. If asked to list items that you would find in the reading corner, you can just say a rug, a bookshelf, books, so things like that. Then we need to prepare learners for silent reading. How is this done? This is done through pace the reading, make it engaging, make it relevant, and manage the reading. So you need to be able to explain how can you do this? How can you pace the reading? How can you make reading engaging? How can you make it relevant? And how can you manage your reading? So it's good that you are able to list them as listed here on the slide, but please also read up about what does it mean. Then we have small reading groups. It is important to also bring small reading groups into a classroom. There are 6 ways given in this paragraph as to why it is important to have small reading groups. Then we move on to our study unit 4, which is the last study unit that talks about different ways of assessments for reading. So we start off with what is the purpose of having reading assessments. So you have your 4 purposes as listed here. It's important that you are able to list the 4 purposes of a reading assessment. Then we have our early grade reading assessment. So this is a type of reading assessment. You need to be able to say, what does this early grade reading assessment assess? So it assesses a child's phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and also comprehension. So you will typically be expected to answer a question such as, why would you use the early grade reading assessment, or what does it assess? Then there's 2 different types of early grade reading assessment. It comes forth in either a formative assessment or a summative assessment. You need to be able to describe what both of these are, and also need to be able to say how are they different from each other. Then you have a third one, which is a continuous assessment. You also need to be able to say, what is continuous assessment? Why would you use it? Where would you use it? How is it applied to assessing reading? Then there are 4 common reading difficulties that is found in the senior primary phase. It's slow readers, that they cannot read for long periods of time, that their comprehension skills is not keeping up, or that they just simply don't enjoy reading. So once again, it is important not just to list them, but to be able to describe them. Then there's 3 different skills when it comes to reading: decoding, comprehension, and retention. Here you have descriptions of each in the 3 slides following each other: decoding, comprehension, and retention. So you have a description of each, but also which signs a teacher should look out for to see that there's problems in that area. So it's important that you know the description, but also the signs to look out for when it comes to decoding, comprehension, and retention of reading. Then you have a section on standardized tests. So what are standardized tests? The most common forms of standardized tests, and also, are standardized tests useful? So when it comes to this statement, you need to be able to say, do you agree or disagree? Is it at all useful in school environments, or is it something that's not useful? So you need to go through the information in your study guide and put together some information for yourself that will basically state your conclusion as to whether you agree or disagree that it's useful. So it extends into the next slide as well. And then we have the section about that there's different types of learner support that a teacher can give. There's these four different types: making your instructions more explicit, providing systematic instruction, increasing opportunity for practice, and applying skills and strategies to meaningful text. So you need to be able to say these 4 different types of learner support. But more importantly even is also that a teacher can offer support to learners struggling with specific reading disabilities. These are stammering, rhythm, intonation, and vocabulary. Please note that rhythm listed here has nothing to do with musicality, but rhythm of reading. So it's important to read through the section that specifically lists how a teacher can support learners that has these specific learning disabilities. Then your study unit 4 ends off with how feedback can be given to learners. So you'll see there are quite a couple of ways that feedback can be given. Please be able to list them, but also describe them. And then we have 2 ways, 2 technology items that can be used when either teaching reading or for children to help them with their reading. This is using a digital video camera, but also a sound recorder. So you have ways in which your cameras, video cameras, can be used, and then you have how can audio recorders be used. Please be able to describe both of these, to say how can cameras be used within a lesson or by learners, and then also how can audio recorders be used. So the information in the study guide is sufficient, but you are more than welcome to also have your own opinions. Just be sure that it is based on this information. So for instance, it has to relate to the facts. So for instance, how can a camera be used? A teacher can go out into, for instance, a science teacher can go out into nature and make videos about specific topics that will be covered in the lesson plan. So this is the ways that a digital video camera can be used, but also an audio recorder. So I'd like to thank you now. This is the end of your presentation that you can use to prepare for assignment, but also the examinations. I once again remind you that this is only summary of your study guide, and it's important that you read through and work through your study guide. And please do not hesitate to ask questions. Send me an email or call me if you struggle with anything. I'm there to assist you. Thank you very much.